Hello, welcome to One Perspective, Purpose and Presence, the channel where we get to talk about what it means to be human. My name is Kwitsaman, and today we are going to talk about COVID. But before I start, please like, subscribe to our channel for more videos created especially for you. COVID. Do you remember the first time when the first lockdowns were initiated? Way back last year in March in 2020. We dropped everything that we were doing. Everything. We all went home and we left it upon government to try to find, or rather to understand, what was happening. The nature of the disease, how fast it spreads, the ways in which it spreads, and from that understanding to find ways of containing it in such a way that we would be able to go back to life as we know it. But let's pause a little and try to understand, what is it that we expected government to do with these things? We, yes, expected to go back to life as we know it. We know that diseases, we have had many diseases, from the beginning of time. And some of them we have not really quite been able to overcome, to sort of eliminate, but simply to understand them, how they spread, their nature, what they can do to us, and maybe how to prevent them, how to protect ourselves from them, or how to use the facilities that government would provide to help us to overcome the disease, so that in overcoming it, not in eliminating the disease, but in overcoming it, we could be able to live our lives in a world where this disease still continues, but we have learned, especially our bodies have learned, how to contain the disease. So maybe the hope when we went into lockdown was not really to understand and then eliminate the disease as it is, because we haven't been able to do that for much of the diseases that already exist in the world. We only wanted a way to live with the disease without it making us sick, without it disabling us from having the normal lives that we live. Because that is how it has always been also with the other diseases that we know of: HIV, TB, strokes, heart attacks, and many others. So, in South Africa, when the time for lockdown came, and the expectation was that now, yes, we sort of understand the disease, and maybe we can now begin to go back into the life that we know, the one that we stopped living when we got into lockdown. But now, when we got to a point where we need to now go back into that, we then realized that freedom was no longer going to be as it was before, because it was going to be categorized into, say, in South Africa, we had level 5 lockdown, which allowed us to do certain things, but not certain other things, such as, visiting other people or being in crowds or participating in sports. Those things were not part of it. And truly speaking, it was a relief to come out of lockdown and be able to do things that we last did some time ago. But at the same time, it was still painful to find that there are those aspects of ourselves that we cannot do, that we cannot participate in. because of the disease. And for many people, I think myself especially, I'd say, I think that's when I got to realize that just like with any other disease, we will never be able to eliminate COVID, but only to find a way to live with it, like the other diseases. The reason I made this video now, specifically, is that someone I know, a colleague of mine, has just died. When I went back to work last week on Monday, somewhere late in the afternoon, we met at the foyer. I've known him to be a tall guy, a bit chubby, but when I saw him on that day, he was so slim, with a mask on. He had changed in a way. To a, to a version I would say was a better look of him. And he really was happy himself with his new change. While we were standing there on the foyer, he told me how he's been exercising during lockdown, eating well, and trying, doing all the necessary, taking all the necessary precautions to protect himself. Wear a mask, wash hands, and all those things. He sort of, outlined this whole, you know, collection of efforts that he was engaged in just to stay alive in the new environment that we're in. The lift opened, we both went into it, and it went up to his floor on the 29th floor. While we were in the lift, I told him, having he having told me how of the efforts he's taken to protect himself. I asked him what he thinks about the efforts we are spending towards this one disease, COVID. In terms of the cost to the economy, to well-beings, livelihoods, even politics and all that. I said to him, what if we throw everything away to this disease in our quest to eliminate it? So that we get to a point one day where we find that our economies and our livelihoods are depleted. And yet, there is no longer even one person who is infected with COVID. And then what? When you turn around and find that the other causes of death that were there before COVID are still there, and we still need ourselves, the motivation within individuals, in governments, in organizations, in business, and broader society. When those resources are required, and yet we have lost so much in our combat against only one cause of death, which was COVID, would it be easy for us to fight that next battle? The lift opened. It was time for him to walk out, and so he didn't quite answer me, but just pointed at me, which I took as, well, he understood the point I was trying to make. So I pressed the lift and went down, and the day ended. And the following day, I went back to work again. And then I met someone who asked me, "Did you hear?" "What?" I asked. And they told me the guy was with just the day before had been shot, dead, while stuck on traffic on his way home. That must have been maybe after an hour or two after I was with him. That took me back to the conversation I had with him. And the last thing we spoke about the other causes of death, how winning against one cause of death is not really necessarily winning against death itself as a concept, but only against one cause of it. And that after that, we still have the other causes that you still have to battle with as much vigor, with all the resources we have, with the motivation that we need to win the battle. The whole thing got me to think that maybe what we need right now as people, as governments, societies, as the world, we only need to contain the disease but not aim to eliminate it. Let's eliminate it if we can, but not at all cost. Not at the cost of using up all the resources that we are going to need to fight the other causes of death. Let's put ourselves into a situation where we understand the disease, its nature, how it infects people, how it spreads, what causes it, how to prevent it. And even more understand, for those who may come into contact with it, who may contract it, to know places where they could go in that case. The same way that we already have HIV and TB, malaria and everything. It all happens out there. Someone does get infected somewhere. And when that happens, people know where to find the help they need. And people know what they may do to prevent it. So that when we understand all of those, our safety against the disease becomes a matter of personal responsibility based on the knowledge that we have about the disease, as well as what we could do to protect ourselves against it. Yes, with COVID, there are those who may feel uncomfortable wearing a mask. And many of us feel uncomfortable because a mask is something we just had to get used to as a way of preventing the disease, of keeping us safe from it. But maybe in our quest to stay alive, our personal responsibility becomes very key. Because in that personal responsibility, that's where each one of us is going to decide for themselves at least what they want. When someone knows that putting on a mask would reduce the risk of their infection, and then they put on the mask, It's them taking responsibility and wanting to reduce the chances of them getting infected. But at the same time, if someone knows the risks and chooses not to take the preventative measures, how does that become government's responsibility or anyone's responsibility? We have guns, we have diseases, we have many things that could kill people. Some people stab each other. But we cannot take knives out of everyone's drawer just for the possibility that someone may stab someone with it. A government cannot make a law that bans knives simply because someone stabbed another person with a knife. At the end of the day, it is all a matter of personal responsibility. It may be a hard fact to accept because yes, government has the responsibility of protecting its citizens and of controlling anything that seems to kill people out there. But still, even with that responsibility, government is a government of people, by the people. It's people who make government. And it's people who firstly take their own personal responsibility, who then want that personal responsibility to be reflected in how they are governed. But in the end, I think the best we could do is to create an environment where there are all the necessary tools and facilities that would help us in case we contract this or that other disease. And then it should be upon personal responsibility for people to choose to use them or not. But not to aspire or to work for a situation where the entire disease is eliminated and before which all of human life is suspended. Because what any disease does to people or an illness is to keep us from living life as we know it. But it is our aspiration, our motivation to live that life that should help us to find a way to overcome any hindrance to it, self, to understand what keeps us from living our lives and to learn to live with it. Because in the end, disease and illness are part of our humanity. And those diseases are made of all the diseases that we know of, identified or unidentified. Should humanity aspire for a situation where all the diseases are eliminated? Maybe we should. But maybe that is a broader program of government and society that could be pursued at another time, not in the middle of an epidemic where the need to stay alive right now is so important for so many people. For now, what we need is the ability to go out there and live our lives. I will end it here for today. Thank you.